Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. So we're going to start this video with a few questions. Question number one, how often do you feel that you are in tune with the people around you? Never, rarely, sometimes, or always? Question number two, how often do you feel that you lack companionship? Never, rarely, sometimes, or always? Question three, how often do you feel that there is no one that you can turn to? Question four, how often do you feel alone? And question number five, how often do you feel part of a group of friends? Now, these are some of the questions from the UCLA Loneliness Scale, which is the most commonly used questionnaire in research around loneliness. There's normally 20 questions. I'll put a link down below if you actually want to do it properly. But in this video, we're going to be talking about the epidemic of loneliness. Why is it a problem? And crucially, what can we do about it? Now, two researchers in 1981 defined loneliness as the unpleasant experience that occurs when a person's network of social relations is deficient in some important way, either quantitatively or qualitatively. In other words, loneliness is the feeling of being socially isolated and the feeling that your social connections are not good enough. And this is particularly a problem for adults as they get older. Now, this is a cool survey that was done in 28 countries. And one of the questions from this was, how often do you feel lonely? Over on the left, this is the percentage of people that said they feel lonely often, always, or some of the time. And over on the right, we have the percentage of people that said they feel lonely hardly ever or never. Now you can see here that the global average is 33%, which means 1 in 3 people feel lonely often, always, or some of the time. Interestingly, 50% of people in Brazil feel that way, 46% of people in Turkey, 43% of people in India. And if we look at this list, the least lonely countries seem to be the Netherlands with 15%, Japan with 16%, and Poland with 23%. And the reason that I'm personally interested in this topic is because I've just turned 30 and I've read a bunch of things and seen a bunch of data that shows that men in particular, as they get older, tend to experience more loneliness than any other group. And so because I'm all about trying to build a life I love, I've been on a bit of a mission to figure out, okay, what are the things that I can do that will help diminish my chances of feeling significant loneliness as I get older? So firstly, we're going to talk about why people feel lonely and what is so bad about it. And then we're going to share 5 actionable strategies that you and I can apply to our lives from today to help reduce the risk of feeling lonely. So question number 1, why do people feel lonely? Well, there's a concept in research around this area called the displacement hypothesis. And this is where we as a species are broadly reducing the amount of time we spend with people in real life and replacing it with time spent online. Now, obviously, social media is good for connecting with people and blah, 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 but there is really nothing that beats in-person connection. And we are replacing that in-person connection with TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, the whole shebang. But on top of the social media apps, there are a bunch of other reasons why this is happening. We are increasingly working from home. And working from home is bad for your social connections because you're not in an office with people, which used to be a thing back in the day. We are increasingly becoming more independent and moving abroad. I'm thinking, for example, of leaving the UK and leaving my friends and family behind because it's like, I've got freedom, I can do what I want. But, as increasingly more and more people do that, the social connections become more fragmented. With a lot of the aging populations we see in developed countries, older people are becoming less and less mobile and are therefore physically unable to see friends. These days, there are a lot fewer public hangouts. There's a lot less street parties and just generally hanging out in the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff that used to be a thing back in the day. And with the whole rise of independence and autonomy and all that kind of stuff, younger people are moving away from their family and their family home, and therefore the family is becoming destroyed as a bit of a unit in like a non-weird way. And so we've got a bunch of these different instigating factors that can cause people to feel this sense of loneliness, the sense of social isolation, and then we can become trapped in the loneliness loop. So initially, because of a bunch of these different factors, we can get this feeling of loneliness, which, as we talked about, is perceived social isolation and poor social connections and the negative feeling that arises from that. That can then reduce our motivation to connect with other people. When we're not connecting with other people, we know that leads to a reduced feeling of psychological safety, which then creates this negativity bias within us where we pay more attention to negative social cues like rejection or isolation. This leads to us literally having more negative memories, like we remember more of the negative things that have happened to us rather than the positive things, which then increases the negative interactions that we have with other people. Broadly, people don't like being around people who are very negative all the time, and so we then end up pushing people away, which then further increases our social isolation, and then we complete the loop and we get into this vicious cycle of loneliness. There's also some cool studies that show that loneliness is actually contagious. So if you spend time with people who feel lonely, you are also then more likely to start feeling lonely. Now, one very practical method to avoid loneliness is to not work at home and instead join others at a co-working space like WeWork, who are very kindly sponsoring today's video. Now, WeWork has become an essential part of me and my team's workflow now that we are a fully remote team. But the nice thing is that even though we are a fully remote team, we have a handful of people who are in London, and we love to meet up at the various different WeWorks in London, and we use the all access areas and meeting rooms. I also love how WeWork has locations all around the world. So I've been to WeWorks in LA and in New York when I was visiting America. And my team members who are also now traveling around because it's a remote job can now just go into into any WeWork anywhere in the world and be super productive. Having a WeWork pass is amazing. It's super hassle-free. It's great for flexibility as a business because you can flex it up and down based on, how big your team is. And they have a bunch of free perks like free coffee and some really nice snacks and table tennis tables and stuff in most of the WeWork locations. WeWork is also great for entrepreneurs because it's full of lots of interesting businesses and founders. And I generally find that if I strike up conversation with someone over table tennis or over a coffee or whatever, generally they're very entrepreneurial and ambitious. Either they're working for a small business or they own a small business or they're a freelancer. And so it's a very fun and nice community to be around, especially if you're an aspiring entrepreneur. And also, to be honest, one of the best things about WeWork is that working from home can genuinely just be really lonely and kind of boring, which is why I personally, even though I have a place in London, I still go to local WeWorks because it's just more fun than being at home all the time. So if any of that sounds interesting, then you can get 20% off your WeWork All Access membership with the coupon code ULIWORKS20 at we.co/ULIWORKS20, and that will be linked down below as well. So thank you so much, WeWork, for sponsoring this video. Okay, so all of this is happening, but then that leads us to question 2, which is is loneliness actually bad for us? How does it impact our mental and physical health? Now, firstly, it's important to separate loneliness from solitude. Solitude, being able to enjoy spending time on your own, is broadly a good thing. That is where you don't have the negative feeling associated with feeling as if you don't have enough social connection in your life, or feeling as if the quality of your social connection is not where you'd like it to be. I love having evenings of solitude to myself where I can play PlayStation once in a while, but if I had too many of those and I didn't have the ability to hang out with my friends or felt like I didn't have a strong circle of friends and family around me, then I'd be feeling lonely rather than experiencing the joy of solitude. Anyway, so how does loneliness impact our mental and physical health? So one interesting thing, which is kind of sad, is what's called the widowhood effect. This paper says the increased likelihood for a recently widowed person to die, often called the widowhood effect, is one of the best documented examples of the effect of social relations on health. The widowhood effect has been found among men and women of all ages throughout the world, and recent longitudinal studies put the excess mortality of widowhood, compared with marriage, among the elderly between 30% and 90% in the first 3 months and around 15% in the months thereafter. You are literally more likely to die if you've had a partner that has recently died. So that's obviously an extreme example, but there's all sorts of other studies that show this incredible correlation and sometimes even causations between social isolation and loneliness and negative health outcomes. So for example, in terms of our physical health, loneliness increases our risk of things like cardiovascular disease. It also makes our immune system weaker. It also makes us more stressed and also reduces our sleep quality. And on top of that, and maybe unsurprisingly, there are also negative mental health impacts of loneliness, where loneliness increases our risk of depression and anxiety and even dementia. Now here's a really interesting study about the effect of loneliness, or perceived loneliness. So this was a kind of mean study that researchers did back in 2005. And they basically got some people into a lab and they split them up into 3 different groups, and they got them to take some sort of quiz. But then regardless of what the participants put in that quiz, the researchers told them one of 3 different things. For the first group of people, this was quite mean. This was the future alone group, where they basically told them, you are the sort of person who will end up alone later in life. You may have friends and relationships now, but by your mid-20s, most of these will have drifted away. You may marry or have several marriages, but these are likely to be short-lived, and you're basically going to end up being alone forever. They told a third of the people this. Then for the second group of people, they told them that they're way more likely to have lots of friends and family as they age. And for the third group, they told them that they're more likely to have just generally bad things happen in their life, like being in an accident or breaking bones or being injured, that sort of thing. Now, based on being primed with these 3 different messages, the students in the study were then asked to drink vinegar. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried tasting vinegar, but it's not very nice. And they were sort of measuring how much vinegar were the students drinking after being told to drink. And this is essentially a measure of self-regulation. Drinking a bitter thing like vinegar and being able to keep on drinking it relies you to self-regulate a lot, which happens from the prefrontal cortex, which is the area at the front of our brain where we can do things that don't feel good, that our higher kind of brains want to actually do. And what's interesting is that if you look at the group that was told they were going to be alone forever, their self-regulation at drinking this vinegar was drastically lower than the other 2 groups. Even the group that said they were going to have loads of accidents. There's something about the thought of being alone forever that really affected these students. So the most important message here is that the effects of loneliness are a lot worse than you might think. And at the same time, we know that working on our social life is actually a very good thing for us because data from thousands of people shows that those with strong relationships are more likely to literally survive by up to 50%. So we've established that loneliness is a problem. Increasingly more and more people are becoming more lonely, especially as they age and especially as we spend way more time online. This is really bad for us. And now we're going to look at 5 actionable things that you and I can do to help combat the effects of loneliness. Oh, by the way, if you're interested in a holistic approach to improving your life, there is an exercise that I really like called the Wheel of Life. And it's a tool you can use to assess where you currently are in your life and you can figure out what you want going forward. Basically, you split up a big wheel into 3 sections: work, health, and relationships. And within relationships, for example, you can split it up into romance, family, and friends. And the whole exercise gets you to rank how satisfied or aligned you feel in each of these different areas of your life from a scale of 0 to 10. And this is actually a pretty good way to work out which areas of your relationships and other areas of your life you might want to put in some more active work into. Feel free to do this by yourself on pen and paper if you want, but I'll also leave a link to a little interactive survey thing that we've created that will take like a couple of minutes to do. That'll be linked down below if you want to check it out. All right, so let's start with strategy number 1. And there's a cool study that really illustrates this where researchers looked at around 40 nurses and they split them up into 2 groups to see, can you actually train these nurses in social skills and what impact does that have on their feelings of loneliness? And to cut a long story short, they found that the nurses who underwent this sort of training in social skills actually reported significantly lower feelings of loneliness. So this is a nice little study, admittedly with a small number of people, but backs up something that I definitely anecdotally know to be true, and you might have that experience as well, which is that social skills are skills, and like all skills, skills can be improved. Over the years, I have read dozens of books on how to improve my social skills. Back in the day, I was very interested in reading books about how to improve my dating life and how to talk to girls, because I was like really scared of doing that when I was a teenager and a little bit beyond. And then over time, I also read books about charisma and confidence, and a big part of why I'm, I think, pretty good at public speaking and like putting myself out there and stuff is the fact that I've read these books like Charisma on Command, books like The Charisma Myth, books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, and these books about improving your social skills kind of might seem weird initially, but it does work. It does help you actually make more friends and helps you therefore reduce your feelings of loneliness. So if you are feeling lonely, I'd be proffering the question, to what extent have you tried to actively improve your social skills? This is actually fairly easy to do. You can just search YouTube for how to improve your social skills. You can search Amazon, you can find books on how to improve your social skills. I think they're really good. I 100% would recommend it. Next, we have strategy number 2, which I like to think of as the go first rule. This is a rule that has made an enormous impact on my life. And the idea here is that basically imbibing the idea into our brains, giving ourselves a bit of a firmware update that everyone is friendly, but you have to go first. If you are in a new place, if you're in an event, if you're in class or whatever, everyone is friendly. You should just assume that, but you have to go first. You have to be the one to make the first move, as it were. You have to be the one to say hello. You have to be the one to talk to that person next to you who's like sitting in the lecture and that you've never met before. Be like, hey, my name's Ali. I don't think we've met before. What's your name? And then that sparks off a conversation. It feels initially weird because you're putting yourself out there and stuff, but everyone is friendly. You just have to go first. Okay, next up we have the rule of rituals. Now, repeated rituals are one of the most reliable ways to increase your amount of social contact and reduce feelings of loneliness. This study, for example, brought students together to play basketball 3 times a week over a 3-month period, and they compared the changes in loneliness with the students who were invited to play the basketball compared to the students who didn't play basketball, the control group. So this is what the results look like. We've got loneliness scores on the y-axis, and we've got time on the x-axis. This is the line for students in the control group, i.e. the ones who didn't play basketball, so you can see the line is pretty flat. Nothing really has changed in their feelings of loneliness. But then this is the line for people who are playing basketball 3 times a week for 3 months. And perhaps unsurprisingly, you can see that there is a significant drop in their feelings of loneliness. The key here is that being able to find recurring rituals that can help you connect with people is super, super helpful. I found this when I was at university. I would have recurring rituals around people coming over to my house for Game of Thrones night. I'd go to a badminton club. Even studying with friends. We had a bit of a sort of study-themed ritual where I'd invite friends to my college's library and we would all study together in exam term. And all of these were recurring rituals that had calendar invites and like recurring events where everyone knew that like, okay, Tuesday evenings are where we go to the Emmanuel College Library and we all study together, things like that. And increasingly over time, as I've graduated and started working and then stopped working and became an entrepreneur and stuff, I've tried my best to incorporate these various different rituals into my life. I could still do a way better job of doing this, and I'm planning to move to a different country, not sure what country yet. But one of the big things that I'm going to do as a strategy for making friends is to start initiating a lot of these recurring rituals. To book a 5-a-side football pitch once a week and find a group of people to come together to play. To host like a Sunday brunch or something, just have that as a recurring calendar event where anyone that I meet can be invited, and then that's how friendships and relationships form. It's sort of a combination of this idea of the rule of rituals and also the go first rule. The more ownership and initiative you can show over these sorts of things, the more likely these events are to happen. And I think, to be honest, a lot of people sort of wait around to be invited to things, but you don't need to wait around to be invited to things. You can just create the thing, and then you can be the one to invite the people to the thing. Everyone wants to hang out, it's just no one wants to do the work of organizing. So if you can do the work of organizing, you'll never run out of friends, basically. Next up, we have the mindfulness rule. So when people are lonely, they often experience other negative emotions too, with things like social anxiety. You'll avoid other people. You'll remember only the bad things that came up in a conversation with friends, for example. And so one way to overcome the feeling of loneliness is actually to practice mindfulness. Now, this study from 2019 is really nice. And it tested how effective this was in adults who were around 32 years old on average. And over 2 weeks, they had to complete a guided meditation course on their phones, where each day they listened to a 20-minute audio lesson, and then they completed a homework task afterwards that took them around 10 minutes. Now, this course was called Monitor and Accept. So they had to listen to social interactions and monitor how it made them feel on the inside, and then they were encouraged to accept all of these emotions, both the good ones and also the bad ones. You can see from this graph that there was basically no change in the adults who took a monitor-only course, where they were taught to be mindful of their feelings, but they weren't encouraged to accept these emotions. And loneliness also did not decrease in those who took a more general course on their phones either. And this third group of adults were told to let their minds drift instead of monitoring and accepting their emotions. Now, even though the course was pretty short, it was interesting to see a 22% decrease in loneliness in the group of adults who took the Monitor and Accept course. So the key takeaway here for me seems to be that if I'm experiencing any kind of feeling of loneliness, A, it is useful to monitor what those negative feelings are, because loneliness, as we've established, is by definition a negative feeling. And secondly, to accept that emotion, to not judge that emotion, to not kind of further beat myself up for like, oh my God, how can you be experiencing loneliness? You've got no friends, all that kind of stuff. It's about monitoring, and it's about accepting those emotions as they arise. And actually, the study concluded, this study shows that developing an orientation of acceptance towards present moment experiences is a critical mechanism for mitigating these social risk factors. Well, let's now move on to rule number 5, which is the rule of selfless help over self-help. Now, this last tip isn't actually about helping ourselves, it is about helping others. Now, interestingly, studies have looked at how toddlers under the age of 2 react when they are given goldfish crackers.
I found even more treats, and I'm going to give them all to you. Oh, treats. But, you know, I don't see any more treats. Will you give one to Monkey? No. Yeah? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Ooh, yum, 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 yum.
And what we see is that they're happy when they get given the crackers, but they are even happier when they give those crackers away to a toy monkey. And this is like a bit of a dumb way of showing something that we all know to be true, which is that helping other people brings us joy. And this is especially the case when we can see the effect that this has. So the actionable takeaway here is to try and adopt the mindset of giving rather than taking. And one way to do this is to set more service goals. And I've thought a lot about this after listening to a conversation on the Diary of a CEO between Stephen Bartlett and Simon Sinek.
Individual athletes who become champions and then suffer depression. It's a fairly common story. You hear this from Olympians. You know, Michael Phelps becomes the most medaled, Olympian of all time, immediately suffers depression. Andre Agassi becomes the most storied, tennis player of all time, immediately becomes depressed. And what I've learned from talking to some of these particularly athletes, but I think it happens in the business world as well, which is from a very young age, they set themselves a goal that, in my words, would be a very selfish goal. I want to be the best at X, the best tennis player, the best golfer, the best whatever. And their entire lives from pretty young ages, every decision they're making is to help them advance this finite goal. And all of their relationships are, can you help me achieve my goal, right? And if you can no longer help me achieve my goal, I don't need you anymore as a coach or even a friend. And there's huge sacrifices, missing of birthdays, missing of Christmases, missing of major life events, because I have to practice so I can achieve my goal.
Selfish goals are those goals that you want to set for yourself, whereas service goals are goals that you want to achieve to help other people. So volunteering, for example, is a service goal and has been shown to reduce loneliness in older people. And another service goal, for example, could be something simple, like calling a friend if you know that they're going through tough times, just to sit and listen and hold a space for them. For me, the main thing that I'm taking away from all this research is that loneliness is bad, and there are definitely actionable things we can do to improve it. And a lot of those are about taking ownership and initiative, rather than thinking of it being other people's job to meet our needs for social connection. It's our own jobs to organize things and take initiative in finding ways to meet our own needs for social connection. And you find when you do that if you become the organizer of events and the person who's proactively reaching out to people, that you hopefully will not be starved of social connection and like social isolation and stuff as you get older. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you might like this video over here, which is 7 daily habits that improved my romantic relationship. And in that video, you'll find lots of other ways to help you build stronger and more meaningful connections with the other people in your life. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you hopefully in the next video. Bye-bye.